Hello, and welcome to the Empowered Curiosity podcast. Today, my guest Yaya Rivera and I explore a question. This big question of what if we could live in harmony with land, community, and business by weaving the concept of ecosystems into every relationship that we nurture. Yaya shares her inspiring journey of cultivating life on a homestead that she calls Río Cósmico, and she draws from Taino cosmology and her own European roots. She shares about her arrival to Río Cósmico and how being in relationship with this land has informed her practices that ranges from how she mothers to how she runs her business. Together, we delve into the moral challenges of quantifying resources exchanged between people and land and how we can balance these effects with regenerative practices. These practices begin with our own bodies. We talk about the effects of dopamine and adrenaline on productivity and the need to be mindful of the balance between effort and reward. We also share insights into embracing symptoms as communication from our bodies that we can use as a compass to point us towards alignment. Yaya Rivera is a multicultural folk medicine practitioner, artist, and mother. She specializes in sacred plant medicines for empowered navigation of the Earth Walk initiation. She's the land steward at Rio Cósmico Homestead, host of the Rio Cósmico podcast, and the primary facilitator of the Medicine Mandala Folk Medicine Apprenticeship and Green Witch Initiation Journey. I love that the name of her land is called Rio Cósmico because it really did feel like we were on a rio with this purposeful meandering cadence to our conversation. I hope that you enjoy this chat with Yaya. Hello and welcome to the podcast, Yaya. We've had to reschedule this call several times now, so this has been a highly anticipated conversation on this side. So I appreciate you making the space to share and show up and just jam it out with me.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you for having us.
Yeah. So I would love to, as always, this conversation is going to meander and free flow because that's kind of my jam, but I'd love for us to root and anchor ourselves in this concept of ecosystems. I'd love to get your perspective because as somebody who lives in collaboration with land, lives in collaboration with community, is building your business within an ecosystem of a community. And that seems really visible from, this side of the screen. I think that you've got some wisdom nuggets in there to share and to play around with. So I guess the first space that I want to ask you to share is what ecosystem you live in, and sort of we'll meander from there.
Well, I currently live in the foothills of the Cuyamaca Mountains. It's Kumeyaay territory, sometimes called San Diego, California. And the name that came to me for our homestead here is Río Cósmico. I'm of Borican Taino descent, and this notion of the cosmic river being the source of all nutrients and blessings and need meeting is embedded in Taino cosmology, but also in my Irish and European roots. And so I learned after naming my homestead Río Cósmico that the Kumeyaay word for the Cuyamacas, it means sky waters or the waters above or beyond the clouds. And so it just felt really special that I was hearing something that really came from this place, even if I thought I was maybe making it up or like getting to design or create,
Oh my God, I love that. And before we hit record, you were talking about you're about to start this new program where you're inviting participants to come and learn on with your land, and just talking about the realities of homesteading essentially. So, can you share a little bit about what that process has been like for you? Because I
I
know
grew
that
up
this
on
land is
a
kind of new.
Yeah, I grew up on a 100-acre Christmas tree farm that
Mhm.
was stewarded and run by four generations of my family together.
Mm.
And so uh, I didn't know until my 20s how unique my childhood was. Like maybe I had a little bit of a notion in my teens. I was like, it's really cool that I'm getting to relate with my family and my grandparents and my aunts and uncles and cousins in such a real way, and like really get to know them and ask them questions growing up, and see their relationships and how they navigated them over time. But it wasn't until my 20s and moving to New York City that I was like, nobody is raised this way anymore. This really like an of the old world kind of experience that I got to have. And
Yeah.
so I think that that was my kind of baseline template. I spent a lot of time in cities before just starting to follow more of an instinctual path and making more like body based choices and what feels good to me. And this is where I ended up. And there's a lot of characteristics that are in common with the land that I grew up in, and then it's really different.
Mhm.
And so we've been here 3 years now, but it's kind of a rapidly changing environment and a lot of different seasons. And so there's just a lot to get to know.
Mhm. Mhm. So, what drew you back to land versus being in a city?
I think it was always pulling, like always this
Mm.
little voice and like all the visions, like I want to live in an earth ship, I want to live in a treehouse, I want to, live in a just cave. I don't know. But I was just in a relationship where that wasn't my partner's vision, and we had met in the city. And so it's sort of like we were already on a path. And
Mhm.
what I was wanting and feeling did represent like a divergence from where we were at that time. And um, so I met a woman who is born and raised in San Diego and living out here in East County, and just sort of magical way. And she invited me to come out to her land, and it was like took me a year to say yes to that invitation because I was
Mm.
busy doing important things. And then at some point I was like, oh, I think that was a real invitation. And I was called her up and came out, and it was kind of, if not like total love at first sight, it was just like something important at first sight. Like something took off from that first, tea
Mm.
date in her yard. And that's where we ended up hosting our year-long program for 4 years. And so I praise her all the time and just say, like, I've never been so completely received, up to that point in my life. Like, no one's ever just given me such a blank check and been like, come do all kinds of crazy stuff in my yard and take over my life 4 times a year, sure, yes, yes, yes. It's just like that kind of generosity of spirit in sisterhood has been everything for me.
Mm. Mm. I think what that brings up for me as you're sharing that story is, I don't know, I struggle with receiving,
Mm-hmm.
you know? And like as you're sharing that story, I'm like, ooh, if I put myself into Yaya's shoes, like how would I have done in that space of receiving? And so I'm curious how that is for you, how that relational dynamic was for you, and if maybe growing up with your family the way that it did, if it shaped your ability to receive in a different way.
Um, I don't know if it ever gets easier. Maybe. I'd love to meet somebody who says it gets like easier to receive after you've like worked on it. But uh, I don't, that hasn't been my experience. But it has been a pattern in my life where somebody has shown up and just really met me in relationship and just
Mhm.
been like a big yes to the unknown. And, what do you want? What do you need? Where do you want to go? Let's do that. It's happened maybe 3 times at this point in my life
Mhm.
that were completely life changing in every way.
Mhm.
And, the first was
Mhm.
my son's father, just someone that was just like, yeah, let's like move across the country and let's have a baby and yeah, let's live in that earth ship, just like let's do the thing. And then the second was Carrie Lou, that was the steward of Elder Farm, which was the first location that kind of we decided over the years it's really an incubator, like that's what that
Mm.
land really feels like. There's like a
Mm.
birth canal and then there's like a womb all the way at the back, and there's just like this incubator, like protected feeling of being in
Mm.
ceremony there. And that incubator really grew the vision to, we just kind of started saying, oh, well, that's one for the big property. Oh, that'll happen when we get the big property. And it just was very
Mm.
casual. And then it happened much faster and sooner than I expected, and was a little bit crushing, to be honest.
Mm.
So, in both the instances of this land coming in and, being totally out of reach, and everyone around me just being like, this is your destiny. So just proceed as if it's going to work out, and just, move forward till you hit the wall. And like the wall never appeared, but the path was like super fast, like one of those like 45-minute births that just is like lightning and like rips you open.
Yeah.
So with that experience, and then with meeting my partner, like these are both 2 times where I just met a person in a magical way, that it was just like undeniable destiny. And in both of those situations, I think I way overthink it. I'm kind of tormented by the like notions of reciprocity and how to tally up like magical reciprocity for something that can never be quantified. When
Mhm.
someone like
Mhm.
gives you a blessing out of like a sense of contract or destiny or pure unconditional love, it has nothing to do with you, but you want to be in reciprocity. You're like, I can never repay you for this. Like,
Mhm. Mhm.
that's it's hard to sit with that. And what I think maybe attracts me to those kind of situations, or why they're part of my contract, is because there's such an accountability there. When you're like, what you have done for me and my life and my family and my creativity and my son, can never be repaid. And so I just want to make sure that we are always good. And I will
Mhm.
bend over backward and pick up the phone. And, when I don't feel, maybe feel like I wanted to talk right now or whatever, you're just someone that I feel a really high level of accountability to. And I think that brings out our best. When
Mhm.
people are like, oh, I'm so underwhelmed by what humans are doing with their creativity on Earth right now. Where did it go? Like the energy to build the pyramids and do all these like amazing things culturally. And it's just like, well, I think it's related to the accountability in culture. And I think that like deep dharmic love just brings
Mm.
out our best.
Mhm. 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 I mean, I think that what you're speaking to is such an, I hate using this term, but that's the only way to describe it, like this anti-capitalistic way of looking at this world, because capitalism says we need to make, you know, the columns whole. You know, if you are hosting something on this person's land, then it needs to be accounted for in some sort of quantifiable way. And what I have found in my more recent sort of like work and just relating is there's not always this perfect banking statement. There's not this like perfect spreadsheet where you can just be like, well, column A is what I have given and column B is what I have received. And instead, I think that this is really getting to the core of what we're talking about here, which is the ecosystem of being able to. give and receive, and we don't place enough value on these like non-quantifiable things, like the magic that you put into this woman's land just by you hosting these gatherings. And maybe the earth and the land has been craving that and needing that. And, through the conduit of these two human relationships, like it was able to receive what it needed in that moment.
Yeah, in that moment, that's a really big one because it's like, that what is needed is always changing. And so being like, oh, yeah, that was what
Mhm.
was needed in that moment. And now it's totally not. Now, like that land and those people want to rest. And,
Mhm.
I will add that I have Virgo rising and it does kind of compel me toward trying to tally up in some kind of quantifiable way.
Mhm.
And then, and certainly monetarily in these times, understanding that like everyone has to feed their kids and we're all kind of stuck in some degree of entanglement with capitalist norms. But it's sort of like the way that I approach ceremony also is like, I got a 50-page checklist and I'm going to check everything on that list. But then when we ring
Mm.
the bell and it starts, we're opening a portal
Yeah,
and
who knows?
I did my best to control everything that could be controlled, and now whatever happens is the lesson, is the teaching, is the transmission. So it's like, hold on super tight and then like let go completely.
Yeah. Oh my God, I resonate with that so deeply. It's something that I've been really exploring in my own work as well. Like, I was actually just talking to my husband about this. Like, I have a corporate client right now, and I've been finding that the workshops that I host for this corporate company, the best ones happen when I go in with like a concept, and then I don't, like you were saying, like a portal opens up and then the communication flows, and then we ask for participation from the group and people are able to like share what's been going on for them and really like get into the depths of it. The ones that have felt less magical are the ones where I've come in with like a very structured like PowerPoint presentation. And
Mm-hmm.
you'd think that because this is a tech company that that PowerPoint presentation would be the one that would like get them more excited and more engaged, but actually it's the first one. And I was sharing with my husband, like, I feel a little bit guilty because I don't do any sort of preparation for these workshops anymore.
Yeah.
And he was like, yeah, you might not do any sort of preparation, but you go in prepared. And I think that like that's kind of what you're speaking to, is like that Virgo part of you is like, yeah, like these are all the logical things that my brain says we need to cover this. And then you allow for that surrender and that feeling of like, okay, like there's something meant to be explored in this space, and let's explore that without being so tightly clung to the like checklist.
Yeah. I imagine that as a somatic based offering that you have, that like what you just described makes a lot of sense, because if I look back over, like I've taught in a lot of different settings, like in prisons and public schools and festivals and, now in our own school. And when I look back, I can say that like the more, like the less comfortable I was being in my body, the more that
Mm-hmm.
I stuck to whatever script, going in. and
100%.
and then the more that I can like breathe and be in my body, which just is like very sensational. And like as an empath, when I'm in a group, I feel so much, and I used to be afraid that I would get overwhelmed, and like lose track of the purpose of circling. But what I found is that actually, like, the more that I can be present to the sensations in my body while facilitating, it's like that I don't get overwhelmed by all the information that I'm getting energetically from everyone, that they give me the information energetically to guide exactly what is needed. So it's
Absolutely.
so obvious in a way, but I really had to feel my way through that one on my own. Like no one could like tell me that in a way that I could really digest and embody. I
Hmm.
just had to do it in all kinds of different ways, some more effective than others. And, something kind of slowly dawning on me over time like, actually, it's safer to be completely in my body versus the idea like it's safer if I'm like skating above like all of this energy.
Mm. Hmm. And I mean, I think that that is like such a gift that I wish more practitioners would embody themselves, is this sense of, I want to call it trust. It feels like trust is the word that wants to be said here.
Hmm.
Um, because when I think about, like, I reflect back on my early years of teaching when I was teaching at a acupuncture college, like, for me to teach 1 hour of that program, I feel like I needed to do like 20 hours of prep.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? And like, instead, if we can really prioritize staying in our bodies, if we can prioritize distilling the wisdom that already lives within us, and then in your situation, what I'm hearing too is like you're gathering wisdom from the external world. Like that's how the name Rio Cósmico came to you, is like by pulling in from who knows where. um when we are able to prioritize that for ourselves as practitioners, then that is where creation starts to come through. That's where these unique ideas and the the special way that you have of hosting circles and gathering, that is different from anybody else, that's different from how I do it, and I'm different from how you do it. Like, we're able to find that unique signature that I think is so needed, instead of what I see so much of out there, which is, join my program so you can learn my signature method of being able to do whatever skill it is that that person's trying to sell. It's like, no, I would so much rather work with and be surrounded with people who aren't trying to package a signature method in giant quotation marks, and have instead embodied their unique way of being, which is how they ripple their medicine out into the world.
Hmm. It is so interesting. I think that's something I like about following your page on Instagram is like I just resonate with your perspective and like I think anybody in my community or yours would agree that like capitalism is toxic. It's made up of a lot of like adjacent thoughts and behaviors that some of which we're conscious of, some of which we're not. We're kind of trying to heal from something that we're still trying to figure out how to like discern the edges of. And
Mm-hmm.
um, yet like people need to eat, people need to go to the doctor, people need to put gas in their car to go to work, pay for electricity to refrigerate their food, and it's like it's
Yeah.
overwhelmingly expensive, in North America where I live for sure. And so there's like this heap of words and language that has been honed by people who are not thinking about dismantling capitalism at all, who are
Yeah.
just using everything they know about psychology and human nature to get people to give up all their resources. And so it's almost like you're sitting there trying to do your work in integrity, and in the middle of the table is all of these little like demons that are like,
Mm-hmm.
call it your signature method. Say there's 5 easy steps,
Yeah.
say that you can promise the outcome of the
Yeah.
experience.
Yeah.
And they're like trying to tempt you and whispering things in your ear, like, you're not going to fill all the seats. You filled all the seats, but you underestimated your expenses. You need this, you need me, you need me. And it's like, that's how,
Hmm.
that's demons, like I have a classical tantra background, and that's like, their word for obstructions of consciousness,
Mm.
uh, and it can be helpful just to be like, I see you, I know what you're trying to do. So I actually did this experiment very recently with my program. And I've been in the experiment from the beginning. It's just being like, what if I don't plan a launch whatsoever for this like very, expensive, I'll say. It's a year long. There's many facilitators. There's in-person component. There's a lot of in-person tangible resources delivered. But what if I don't plan a launch at all? What if I just pick like my most amazing artist, somatic, sensual, sensory witch, friend, and ask them to video and edit through their lens, trust that the artistic collaboration, say, let's just make it art that gives the transmission that we feel the program gives. And then just there, everybody got the transmission for free who watched it on
Hmm.
YouTube. And we only really need 15 of those people to be moved enough to buy it. So, let's just say maybe that'll just happen and see. And that has mostly worked for us, which is amazing and a huge blessing. But like, it's like that little, all those voices of all the things you have to do to sell are always there. And it's just, they kind of hijack your nervous system, and they play on any existing anxiety that you may have, or any root chakra issues about security and stability.
Yes.
And they just kind
Yes.
of poke on them. So even if someone else isn't out there, I'm not talking about like other people's marketing. I'm talking about my own experience of trying to have my passions be my way of being in the world. Um, so it's all inside of me also. Maybe
Hmm.
people are manifesting those like things externally as like other people in their feed who are poking on them. But like for
Hmm.
me, it's just things that I've absorbed by growing up in this culture that are inside of me and that are pushing and poking on me. And so my most recent experiment, the words that came were regulated launch.
Hmm.
And it was just, what if every time that I start to get anxious or dysregulated, or I was like, I really got to push right now. I got to get this out by tomorrow. I got to stay up all night, things that I used to do regularly. And what if I'm just like, or I'm going to eat a cannabis gummy and go to bed? Like I'm just going to stop that train, like by
Yeah.
whatever means necessary, and just say, I don't believe in you. Like that. I love that scene in the labyrinth where, she gets everything that her like undercooked self thought would make her happy. And she realizes that it's all like super creepy, and is just like, you have no power over me, dude,
Hmm.
Goblin King. And that just kind of having that approach is just like, you have no power over me. I'm going outside. I'm going to go pick up my son, and we're going to go eat ramen instead of, me picking him up and letting him be on his iPad for 3 hours while I grind out like a little bit more, something that might make this happen faster. And,
Hmm.
uh, and we filled all our spots. So
Yeah.
like, and it's like in a weird way, like I went through a lot in my head, but I just didn't let it take over my body. And I kind of stubbornly just said, like, me and my body are doing something nice for ourselves right now. And the work is done, or if it isn't done, it's not something that I could do in integrity with my body. And it
Hmm.
was too much. So even if on some level I should have done it, well, I didn't. So this is just, it's just me here. I'm enough. And I hope to find the people out there who view the world that way also, that they're like, these are human beings here. And if they didn't get to I didn't get to order the labels, the name labels that, have the pronouns on them. So I just found a bunch of masking tape that I already had and was like, you know what? We're going to use Sharpies on masking tape and it's
Yeah.
going to be fine.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that concept of a regulated lunch. It's something that I'm playing with as well right now, is just like a total social experiment. And what I love about it is regulation can look so different for so many people, you know? And so for me, I'm more leaning towards like a more surrendered lunch like you did. But for somebody else, it might be more regulating to them if they had more structure to it. You know,
Totally.
nobody is wrong, nobody is right in the situation. It's really about listening to your body and being like, okay, body, so like what feels like it's going to give you a sense of stability and safety. And I can say straight up, 4 years ago, doing the kind of launch that I'm doing now would have been completely dysregulating. Like there were so many
Mm-hmm.
layers of my own sense of security and my own sense of like trust in the community and messaging that needed to happen in order for me to do a launch kind of similar to yours, where, I don't have an official launch date,
Yep. That
I
was so big for me. It was like,
yeah.
I got to launch with the seasons. I got to launch with the seasons. It's a seasonal business. And I was like, well, I'm not ready. Well, you're not leaving people enough time to decide and organize themselves. And it's like, well, I'm not ready. I need a few more days. It's another week now. Just like, it was
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah. Yeah. And it also gives me the space because the way that I've run launches in the past is I've created content like for the entire 2 week period, like ahead of time, and then thrown it out there on like a very strict schedule. But this time I'm kind of like, you know what? I'm just going to keep my ears open and see what the community wants to talk about. And I'll write things about that, and I'll put out content on like a day to day basis sometimes. And that has felt incredibly freeing. We have the next round of Business Alchemist mentorship gathering in May. We're recording this in April, and I already have 4 out of the 6 seats taken without really even trying, like in the
In the
conventional ways of
traditional sense,
trying.
yeah.
Yeah,
Because
in
you're
the
like
ways.
deeply attending to this, creatively, and you're paying a lot of attention and energy and thought and effort, but just you're not like using sales tactics. You're like
Mhm.
listening and paying attention to what you think you know wants to come forward. I don't know.
Yeah. And
That's
that's
what I
really what
see
I would like
anyway.
to like ripple out into the community too, is like you don't have to do it like me. You don't have to do it like yeah. But what does your body want to do in this moment? How does it feel when you think about a particular kind of lunch, and can you do something that makes your body feel comfortable? And I think that the work that I'm doing on my end, because surrender is such a hard concept for me, like how can I continue to like it feels like a yoga stretch right now, is like how can I deepen into this sense of surrender without
Mm,
breaking myself? And
I
so there
like that.
is this like sort of like toggling and this like emotional physical sensation of just stretching.
Hmm.
And that's really what I think like a regulated launch is doing.
Yeah, for me, it's like my Virgo brain will, and I would say even part of my neurodiversity is this like compulsion towards completeness. So if someone asks me a
Mm,
question, I can give too much information because I like want to be really complete in externalizing everything that I know that might be of value. And it's like, oh, that's not what people want. But I can kind of map out this really complete picture of everything that I think that I'm willing to do or that I have some desire to do that has an ability to reach the people that I think are asking for this kind of thing or looking for this kind of thing. And it's massive. And then to just instead of scheduling it all and feeling like, okay, I got it, how do I get all this done in this period of time, like I just kind of start at the top And it just, whenever I have the energy and I feel motivated about the work, then I'll just do as many things as that motivation covers. And then
Yeah.
it might literally be 2 weeks that I like don't do anything because I got family stuff going on or something. And then I just pick back up. So it's like something about, if there's this like fire hose of energy, that's
Mm-hmm.
like, my whole destiny and dharma, and just trying to come out of this little opening. And it's just like, if it can just kind of um, use some of my, I don't know, like yoga, you were saying, like some of the containment that comes from
Mm-hmm.
like tantric sadhana, where it's like you're kind of growing and growing and growing your Shakti, but then at the same time you're growing in like responsibility for not just like spraying that all over everybody in distance. So kind of using some of those muscles to contain my excitement or enthusiasm or the magic of the thing, and just allow it to come out in a way that's not damaging to my body. Because I do love and
Mm.
respect a lot of women who just do their thing in a very instinctual kind of way, where it just, they kind of like rip that fire hose, and it's like, they can make a lot of money really fast, but then the health problems that some of my sisters have, they're just like, okay, there's a toll. And
Yeah.
I just come to kind of respect my body in a different way over the years, and just say, like, it's not an infinite resource. uh,
Mm-hmm.
and I'd like to stick around a little longer. So I gotta
Yeah.
just be more gentle with
Yeah.
how I even let like spirit energy come through my body, like how I channel,
Mm.
how I manifest. Like, just because it's magic doesn't mean like our little fragile human physiology knows what to do with it, and that it's always going to be
Mm.
good for our bodies.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I've been playing around with this concept a little bit privately, and it's kind of an unformed thought, which is why I feel like I need to preface it. But I feel like what you're speaking to is like the dopamine rush that we get from
Mm,
being entrepreneurs.
mm,
And I feel like I need to define that a little bit, because I mean, dopamine is not a bad thing, right? Like,
mm-hmm.
it's not, it's a natural part of our functioning physiology. I think that where it can get mutated is like when we get, or let me think about this, when we get or romanticize that big payoff reward without the hard work to get there, right? So, like a healthy way, a healthy expression of dopamine is I'm going to effort and then get a reward that is, um, like not necessarily like an equal measure of that effort, but it's like,
Digestible.
yeah, that's great. Yeah. And the way that I feel like we're marketed to in social media nowadays, and it's kind of what I was talking about in my post this morning on Instagram, is we romanticize this idea of like taking the big leap, and like, if I can do it and make, $1 million in 6 months, then you can do it too. And it's this like we're selling candy, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not actually nourishing and sustainable. And I
Yeah.
love what you were just sharing, because to me, like, that feels sustainable. Even the way that you interact with magic needs to feel sustainable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think also, I don't know who it was, but somebody did some really nice created some really nice information content around like how to tell the difference between like, dopamine and oxytocin and adrenaline in your
Mm.
system. And it's like, oh man, I gotta find that article, because
Mm.
like at the time it was just like really helpful for me. And like what I get more for, I think I have low dopamine due to some of my neurodiversity also, but what I get a lot is adrenaline.
Mhm.
And so it's just like running on adrenaline, and then it's like the same as working in a bar in my 20s, just
Mhm.
being wrecked afterward,
Yeah.
but like doing so much in
Yeah.
such a short period of time, being so focused and capable. And so something part of my regulated launch experiment was like, can I let go of the identity of being like capable and able-bodied, or being perceived as like really capable and able-bodied by like the world?
Mm.
Because without that extra boost of adrenaline, my brain just, like, my cognitive function is not the same. So it's like not having that sharpening, what's the word that's coming? It's actually an unfair advantage. Like, you can't do the Olympics and take steroids. It's like there should be things like that in life where, like, you
Yeah.
can't be supposed to, if you're trying to be healthy and you have to like compete for resources with people that are like super caffeinated and like on all the enhancers, and adrenaline just being one of those. So yeah, like I feel okay about it just being like, yeah, I can't do what I used to do, like in
Yeah.
my role. I can't track as much. I can't, yeah, tracking is a really big one. Without that
Mhm.
adrenaline, I feel like my tracking of the whole ecosystem of the project is down like 60%.
Mm.
And I'd rather adapt the project and communicate with my team members than hang on to that unfair advantage, that hack of just like relying on the adrenaline kicking in at a certain point and like carrying something
Yeah.
in a way that like everybody crashes afterward.
Yeah. And I mean, it is kind of an unfair advantage, but then, like you were sort of implying earlier, is it has a real effect on your body.
Yeah.
And quite frankly, also on the psyche, because, I mean, to take it to the extreme, like how many lottery winners end up just squandering their entire fortune? It's like you received this giant resource and this big abundance without any sort of efforting. And so it kind of hijacks your dopamine system and you didn't know how to digest that. Whereas when you are putting in, and this is kind of how, maybe this is a romanticization because this is what I would like to do in the near future, is that's kind of how I feel about homesteading. Is like, if I'm tending to chickens and taking care of them and really like slowing down and appreciating the fact that they're giving me eggs and meat, you know, that's going to be a different sort of dynamic and relationship that I have with the food that I eat.
Yes.
And
And I
so,
genuinely believe that that egg is more nutritious, that your body
mhm,
knows what to do with those nutrients in a much more multidimensional way when you're involved in the whole process.
yeah, absolutely. And and it's not just like you were saying, like the nutrition piece. It's like there's also energetic nutrition that comes from knowing that you put in the hard work to grow that carrot or tend to the soil in a particular way. And so, like, to me, it's like, can we go back to these things that we have made, quote unquote, more efficient? um and by making it more efficient, we've turned them into monoculture farms, we've turned them into an extractive economy, and really unpack how maybe the old way, the traditional way of doing things was actually not, you know, all that inefficient. Like there
Right.
were really beautiful and nutritious byproduct from that system that we've lost by caffeinating, you know, everything.
Well, I would add also that, like, I have this really wonderful ally that is fibromyalgia, that, like, it does not allow me to drink alcohol. And thus, I am not an addict. It does not allow, I cannot process caffeine into energy or sugar into energy. And thus, I still crave sugar as much as everyone else, but like have just learned that it's not worth the consequences. And so the end result is like a lot of health on a lot of levels, um,
Mm,
as much as like people with fibromyalgia experience a lot of discomfort in their body. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm uncomfortable in here, but everything is radiantly healthy. Like if I get tested and, all of the doctors are always like, oh, your diet's great, your lifestyle's great, all these things. And so it's like, I know that if I didn't have fibromyalgia, I would drink the coffee, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and do my job and then drink the alcohol at the end and relax and go to bed. If it did that for me, I know that I would do it because I was born and raised in the United States, and that's a very powerful collective movement
Mm-hmm.
around how to be. So, it's like there's an interesting trade off there. It's just like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm in pain a lot, but um, it has shown me this whole other path
Mm-hmm.
around just really truly tending and taking care of myself and nourishing myself.
Mm-hmm. I love that perspective of looking at your fibromyalgia as an ally, you know? Um, I think what's coming up for me is there's this was more present back in my career as an acupuncturist, but like there's almost this concept of like make me feel better so that I can just go out there and keep doing the things that are wrecking my body.
100%.
You know? And I saw this mostly when I was working in sports medicine. I was the acupuncturist on staff for the development team for an NBA team. And like these guys would come in with these injuries, and it was like, whatever it takes, like, throw the needles in. I just need to be able to go out to the game next week,
Yeah.
And it's like, no, actually, what your body is needing is rest. Maybe what it's needing is um
To not
like
play that sport ever again. Sometimes our body asks us to give up something that we love and are completely identified with, like forever. And like
mm,
that, I think it was Carolyn Myss had in her book Anatomy of Spirit, which I read when I was like 16, and at the time it was very influential. But
mhm,
there's a part in it where she's talking about giving a talk, and where she asks everybody in the audience, like, raise your hand if you'd be willing to change your diet in order to heal. And like most everyone did. Raise your hand
yeah,
if you'd be willing to leave your relationship if that's what it took in order to heal. Less hands go up. Raise your
mhm,
hand if you would move across the country to a place where you didn't speak the language if that's what you needed to do in order to heal. Less hands. She keeps
mhm,
going and just basically making the point that like all of these things might be what you need to do in order to heal. And like
yeah,
that's been a part of my psyche, since my teens, and I'm really grateful because I do believe that's what the healing is. It's we're all born and we kind of get indoctrinated into families and cultures, and symptoms are like our soul's way of telling us that we have a path,
mhm,
and try doing everything in its power to get us on our path or keep
yeah,
us on our path. And I don't know like how many folks out there. I have no way of knowing how many folks out there see symptoms that way, but my feeling is like not very many. But like
yeah,
I have seen it to be the case that it's just
yeah,
like there's a lot that needs to be changed, and it's not small stuff.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I I've one of the things that I just keep I will stand on this soapbox until I die is this concept of signs and symptoms being the I mean, your body is the storyteller of your life, and signs and symptoms are its form of communication. It's really how it speaks to you. And it's one of these things where, it's going to start perhaps with a whisper. And if you don't listen to your body when it's whispering, it's going to then speak in its speaking voice. And if you don't speak or listen to it when it's there, it's going to start yelling and screaming and throwing a temper tantrum. And at that point, that's where a lot of us in the Western culture, that's when we start listening. And then we try to suppress those symptoms
Mm.
with some sort of medication or surgery instead of being like, oh, how did we get here, body? Like,
Yeah.
you've been trying to communicate with me. And I now see that actually, that nausea that I felt when I ate that particular food was a precursor to the acid reflux, which was a precursor to the stomach ulcer, which then was a precursor, like it's like it's starting to build, and it's like, oh, at the crux of it, actually, the nausea was because I was having a meal with a husband that I wasn't really aligned with, you know? And so, like, your body is trying to, like in such beautiful language, trying to, like, work through these struggles of, like, "Hey, this is not aligned. This is not okay.
Mm,
And can you pay attention to it as it is trying to speak to you?"
mm. I had a really, for me, fascinating thing come to awareness more recently because I have just, had so much work with different modalities over my life because of this, chronic illness they call it. But I consider it more of a disability because there's nothing you can do. Like,
Mm,
there's
mm.
people who have it don't get better. Um, and an overwhelming number of people from Puerto Rico have fibromyalgia. So I
Oh,
think that's really
interesting.
fascinating because it's just like whatever our body's natural magic is, there's just no room for it in North America. So, people
Mm,
on the island don't really have the same, don't always have the same kind of access to diagnosis. So, it's just, that's another conversation. But when people from Puerto Rico come to the United States and they have access to um, this like Western medicine or like regular doctor and the ability to go through pay for all the testing, then that's what comes out is
mm,
fibromyalgia. Um, but even with all this body awareness, like I started to have, every time I would get my period, I would have this like excruciating pain in my hands. Like I would wake up in the morning feeling like my hands had been like smashed with a baseball bat. Like, and I would just
mm.
try to think about what happened. I don't remember, feeling like I'd smashed it in a car door, like that bad. And I started to track this. And over time, what I realized was that all throughout the month, all the time, like if I was on a Zoom, I would have my hands like under my butt
Mm,
to try to keep my body from being like as wiggly as it is. And if I was talking to someone, I would be crushing one hand super hard, and then I would take another turn and I would be crushing the other hand. And I managed to be doing this for 40 years with no awareness whatsoever. And it just started to be too much. And so my body started to like break through with this pain. And what I've managed to figure out is it's related to my neurodiversity. And if I had gone to the doctor at any point over the last 4 years and they said, did you have hand flapping as a child? I would have said no. But it's like, no, I bet I
you were
did. And
suppressing it,
I
yeah.
bet at some preverbal age somebody gave me a dirty look or said stop that, and I couldn't stop it. And so I found a way to stop it. And it was so long ago I
Mm,
forgot about it. And this is the result. But almost every day that I get up in the morning and walk my dog alone on this country road, I'm going like this all over. And I look at the trees and they're
mm,
going like this. And there's this wonderful YouTube video you can Google that's called, I think it's called In My Own Language. And it's a, quote unquote, nonverbal autistic person who's made this video saying, this is my language. And she's
mm,
showing how her body's just like an instrument that is picking up on all these micro movements and that she's in full communication with her entire environment all the time. And, saying, and yet you say, I have no language. Uh,
mm,
and so, just as like an example of, how symptoms, like if I had just been like, I can't figure out what this is about and given up and just taken more painkillers,
yeah,
um, there's a whole journey there of just kind of being of self-awareness and self-acceptance. Um,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Oh my goodness. I'm like moved to tears hearing your story here, um and just so that we have like a bit of context for folks who are listening to it on the audio, like as Yaya was speaking and saying, this is the movements, like she's moving her hands around like you would imagine like the leaves on a tree would move, and like how branches are swaying in the wind, and I think that there's so much around neurodiversity that is not understood and has been suppressed for so long, and like people have had to adapt in really unhealthy ways, you know?
Mm.
And your body in its infinite wisdom knew that this is not how you're meant to express, and luckily, and you've had opportunity to like actually sit with that self-awareness, and instead of continuing to suppress it and taking a painkiller to like stop the pain in your hands, you started listening to your body, and you know I think that that is an expression of your creativity, honestly.
Yeah, I have a really like different perspective than I had even a few years ago, where I'm like, well, what causes somebody to identify as a witch? Well, you're being told by everyone and everything around you that you're too weird and you don't belong and you don't fit in and that
Hmm.
you're bad. Um,
Hmm.
and so it's just kind of occurred to me like, oh, I think all witches are neurodiverse. And it's just another word for it that can help you find people who maybe have a little bit more understanding or resonate with your perspective a little bit more. And, for me, these kind of movements that come out more naturally or there's more acceptance for in like ritual space, if you're saying, okay, we're all doing movement embodiment now, then all of a sudden everybody's like, this is
Yeah, then
great.
you're like the genius in the room, right?
Right. And like, I think that these are, I read the book Neurotribes and they'd use the term autistic genius, and they talk about how a lot of the studies on autism are in men. So a lot of what we know about the autism
Mm,
spectrum is how it manifests in men. And so the
mm,
autistic genius of just using the words of this book of men tends to be around technology. And it shows
mm.
how all the whole of Silicon Valley and all of these online communication ways have been developed by people who had difficulties with the social interaction.
Yeah.
And there's not a lot of study on how the autistic genius manifests in women.
Mm.
And I feel like I know.
You guys
It's
are
like
witches.
yeah, I'm just like, it's intuitive gifts. It's
Yeah.
psychic powers. How can someone walk up to you and say, your granny Jean says that you're cooking the apples for too long? And, that's never met you before. How can someone have that level of specificity? Like how, and I would always just go, magic. Oh my God, magic is real when those things would happen. But it's like
Hmm.
the, the neurodiverse brain is just like, more of the gating channels are open.
Hmm.
So everybody has
Hmm.
the channels, but like a lot of them get shut down the minute you're born. And that if more of those channels got reopened somehow or stayed open, then you just see more, hear more, feel more.
Yeah.
And then there's a lot more processing of your life experience that's required in order to not have symptoms. So we think our symptoms are because we must have had some huge trauma or something, but it's like, for some people, it's just the experience of being alive
Yeah.
is so much to process that we don't have enough hours in the day. And so it gets backed up. And then we have, symptoms that are coherent with somebody who's had lots of abuse or lots of neglect, and you're like, I don't know why I have this. I wasn't abused or neglected. And I think, while it's a good chance that you are a witch, a highly sensitive person, neurodiverse, autistic, indigenous, any of these different words for like when you're just like very, very tuned into the environment and picking up a lot more of what nature and the elements and great spirit is putting down.
Yeah. Yeah. And actually, I would even argue that this concept of neurodiversity is is really a concept around, like, can we singularly create the kind of person who is going to contribute to society and capitalism in the ways that it's going to be productive.
Mm.
And I would even argue that like the more common expression is to be different.
Mm-hmm.
And even for those of us, like I will only speak for myself, like I feel like I've been able to adapt really well to the system. I always did well in school. I got a good career. I had the white picket fence and the husband and all the things that society says is your markers of success. And it didn't feel right because it wasn't really an expression of who I was as a soul,
Mm-hmm.
And so even for folks who seemingly quote unquote fit in,
Right.
like I wonder if there are aspects of their personality that can be expressed in a different way that is more genuine and authentic to them as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's definitely like a lot of different answers to the question of like, what is the point of like this initiatory journey that you lead people on? But like one of them certainly is like how we express like everything that we have inside or that we care to share. It's like a recipe where like we could all start out with the same exact ingredients, but like you might put 6 eggs and no sugar, and it's bread, and someone else does this other thing and it's a dessert. And so it's like then within ourselves, it's sort of like we find a recipe that kind of works to get our needs met.
Mm-hmm.
That and the first time that we ever find a recipe that kind of works to get our needs met, we usually make an identity or life habits around
Yes,
that.
yes, yes,
And
yes.
then it becomes harder and harder to keep going or try again because they're just like, well, this worked better than anything else. I'm not really satisfied, but I'm more satisfied than I ever was.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's where a lot of people are at in their 20s or 30s or 40s, which is the general age group of most people who come 25 to 50. Um, but that's somewhere in the middle where people are like, there's just something more,
Yeah,
and I'm gonna die if I don't find a way to express that. Like it
yeah.
starts to actually just make people sick in lots of different ways. And so the idea of like to find a bolder, more amusing way to express the the pieces or recipe for combining all the parts, like I think that's a really worthwhile endeavor. It just
Mm-hmm.
that maybe is minimized, just like, well, you got enough, so you should just like be happy, and maybe your life's a little boring, but whatever, you don't feel good too good, but you should just be grateful. And it's like, well, it's good to be grateful, but also if there's something inside that's kind of like urgently pressing on you from the inside and you don't know what it is, then I think it's good to believe that there might be something more possible for ourselves, and like give ourselves the space and permission to like fuck around, like
Mm-hmm.
experiment, make mistakes, make dumb stuff. I write music and I'm just so self-conscious about it, but it's to privately just give myself a lot of space to write a lot of really bad music.
Yeah. And what I love about that is it's like such a I would love to see how you parent your kid, because like it's such a permission slip to just be yourself, you know. And to circle it back to what we were talking about earlier, oftentimes if you're not living in alignment with yourself and with your soul's purpose, your body is going to be one of the first places that it communicates through, and it's going to start showing up. And, a doctor might label that as anxiety, but maybe there's a reason for that anxiety.
Yeah.
Maybe there's something going on a deeper level that is your body asking to be tended to. And so can we start listening to those pieces of things that we label as signs and symptoms and then try to suppress, and instead can we look at them as messengers? Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I feel like we have meandered so beautifully. um, Is there anything else you feel like you absolutely are like, I can't leave without saying this thing?
I'm not sure exactly what it is, but I'm gonna try.
Yeah.
This is something around, where we started off about like the, discovering challenges with receiving. Um, And then where we ended around like what makes us choose like the bolder creative expression, like the just weirder, wilder, more creative expression over like, something that is, decently creatively nutritive. And for me, I feel like I want to say it's all very related to our sexuality.
Mm-hmm.
And that, like, that's a really good place to explore, maybe anything, any symptoms, anxiety or depression or feeling stuck or, what feelings come up around receiving, is just like, it's just so primordial. And whatever safety we can find to kind of deeply explore in that universal language of giving and receiving and energy exchange, will show up like in surprising ways as growth in our life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Girl, I feel like we could do an entire episode about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's big.
Mm-hmm.
But I had no idea like 10 years ago. It's just like I just didn't get like how all the parts were connected or like how they could be so interrelated, or what to do with that knowledge that they're interrelated. So just like I gotta just say that kind of committing to growth in that area seems like the best value, has delivered the most value in terms of enjoyment and expression and creating some feelings of safety or security in other areas of life, to have this like really deep experience of like being expressed, being received, receiving.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, Yaya, how can people find you? So I would love to send folks to your work.
So we have a website that's just riocosmico.org. And then we are on Instagram at least a few times a week. And, it's really us there. So I feel like, people want to connect. I'm available and accessible on Instagram at Medicina Río Cósmico, all one word.
Perfect. And I do love what you post on Instagram. I haven't gone and checked out your website yet, but just the way that you relate to your work, you relate to your community. I also do feel like you put up pieces that are like art pieces to me. So go check out Yaya's Instagram and website, folks.
Thank you. I will say we do have a podcast also that's just, deeper dives, longer conversations. And that's also called Rio Cosmico. It's available in all those places. But if you're a long form person, then it might be for you. We just explore different ways that the healing can look.
Perfect. Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.